Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Langevin, and for nearly 22 years, I've had the privilege of representing the 2nd District of Rhode Island in the United States House of Representatives. I want to begin by thanking the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology for the opportunity to speak with all of you today about where we are and where I think we're headed when it comes to the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure. This is a topic that's become somewhat of a specialty of mine over the years. As I started to explore the issue of cybersecurity many years ago, before most people knew how to spell cyber, it quickly became clear to me that our nation was dangerously vulnerable to cyber attacks across all facets of our society, particularly within our critical infrastructure. It became equally clear to me that strengthening our nation's cybersecurity and resilience would be one of the most critical national and economic security issues of the 21st century. Since then, I've been ringing the alarm bells on Capitol Hill, trying to draw more attention to this important issue. It was a bit of a lonely road at first, I must say, but over time, especially within the past few years, my colleagues in Congress have really started to grasp the importance of cybersecurity as a national policy priority. Unfortunately, though, a lot of that had to do with the number of high-profile cyber incidents that we've seen over the last few years. Lawmakers are now all too familiar with the ways in which cyber insecurity can result in serious disruptions to essential services and utilities like healthcare, energy, and water. But that has created opportunities for legislation addressing the cyber threats that we do face, legislation that would not have been possible just a few years ago. Now I'm proud that Cyberspace Solarium Commission has been a guiding force for Congress in the cyber policy space over the last several years. While this year will be my last year in Congress, I know that the Solarium Commission's report will endure as the nation's cyber legislative roadmap. Of course, the end of my term is still some time away. I go till the end of the year, and I have to say I intend to continue working diligently to improve the nation's cybersecurity through my very last days in office. To that end, I've recently been thinking quite a bit about how a better understanding of cyber risk could inform future policy-making efforts. Thinking about the threat vulnerability consequence model of risk, I've been particularly focused on the vulnerability part of that equation. Specifically, we must develop a better understanding of the security vulnerabilities that are present in critical technologies, those that are fundamental to the performance of national critical functions. These include industrial control systems that critical infrastructure owners and operators rely on to run facilities and deliver services. They also include hardware and software that U.S. telecommunications providers rely on to build our networks, and widely used open source software libraries that are baked into large swaths of our digital infrastructure. On the Solarium Commission, we saw a need for trusted, centralized, U.S. government-backed critical technology security centers to evaluate and test the security of these devices and technologies that underpin national critical functions. Representative Gallagher and I have attached a bipartisan amendment to the America Competes Act that would establish these critical technology security centers, and I'm hopeful that we can operationalize these essential security vulnerability testing facilities as soon as possible. The insights that these centers could generate into the vulnerabilities of our most foundational technologies will allow for a more clear assessment of national cybersecurity risks. That, in turn, would inform national strategic efforts to mitigate cyber risk. And speaking of national risk management at the strategic level, I see opportunities for Congress to advance that work as well. Now, the U.S. government has made strides in its analytical understanding of the 55 national critical functions, but it still lacks rigorous, codified, and routinely exercised processes for identifying, assessing, and prioritizing cyber risks to critical infrastructure. That's why my fellow Solarium commissioners and I recommended the creation of the National Risk Management Cycle. We need a comprehensive understanding of national risk, and we need to use that understanding to ensure CISA and the sector risk management agencies are orienting their strategic, budgetary, and programmatic priorities to effectively and efficiently mitigate cybersecurity risk to critical infrastructure. So I was glad to see a provision for a national risk management cycle included in the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. Looking ahead, the next few weeks could prove very fruitful for the U.S. government's capacity to understand cyber risk. Critical technology security centers and the National Risk Management Cycle are two key pieces of that puzzle. And with the American Competes Act and USICA going to conference very soon, we have an opportunity in the coming months to fit them into place. Of course, achieving a full picture of our cyber risk posture will only be half the battle. We must also develop policies to actually manage and mitigate that risk. So this presents its own set of challenges because cyber risk management is not a one-size-fits-all concept. Cybersecurity challenges are not uniform across our 16 critical infrastructure sectors or even within sectors themselves. As I've thought about this, one thing that has become clear to me is that risk mitigation strategies must be adaptable to the cybersecurity maturity of the entities involved. Some critical infrastructure owners and operators possess very high level of cybersecurity maturity that leaves them best positioned to defend their own networks with federal support. For these entities, the return on investment for voluntary technical assistance or other federal services would not be as high as it would be for more resource-constrained owners and operators. So instead, these cyber mature entities would benefit from access to better intelligence about the cyber threats they face or access to public-private collaboration initiatives like the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. Conversely, more direct federal government intervention and technical assistance might be required to mitigate cyber risk to less mature critical infrastructure owners and operators who aren't currently in a position to send someone from the firm out to the JCDC or into a SCIF to get briefed on the latest cyber threats. Consider, for example, a hypothetical scenario in which the federal government has identified a cyber threat aimed at Pfizer and a threat aimed at a small firm with one IT employee in Pfizer's vaccine supply chain. Pfizer has significant use for better government intelligence about the threat because it can use that information to orient its sizable IT capabilities in response. But sharing that same intelligence with Pfizer's supplier will not really help that firm defend its network because the firm has no capability to act on that information. So it's important to note that these two entities have a similar level of cyber risk in this scenario. If either were hit with a significant cyber attack, it would disrupt the United States' ability to domestically produce mRNA vaccines through Pfizer. But the manner in which the government must work to address the risk is different for these two entities. For those entities with high levels of cyber maturity, the federal government does not need to step in and bolster these entities' cyber defenses for them. Instead, it can work in a supporting role to maximize the cybersecurity capabilities that these companies already possess. To be sure this strategy is specific to a small group of entities, the list of critical infrastructure owners and operators who possess this capacity is much smaller than those who aren't. But in my mind, chief among this group are entities that comprise our nation's systemically important critical infrastructure. The Solarium Commission, we conceptualized the term systemically important critical infrastructure as SICI entities, for lack of a better term, using two criteria. One being a high level of cybersecurity maturity, the other being a very high level of consequence to the nation, such that if the services were disrupted by a cyber attack, it wouldn't just be the company having a bad day, the entire country would also be having a bad day. So that combination of critical importance and high cybersecurity maturity should put SICI entities at the top of the list when it comes to receiving some of the benefits I've mentioned, like more actionable intelligence and access to government public-private cybersecurity collaboratives like the JCDC. Yet, given these entities' importance to our national and economic security, I also believe that SICI entities should be required to implement minimum cybersecurity standards. As we envisioned it on the Solarium Commission, the SICI regime would be a new social contract of operational collaboration between the federal government and systemically important critical infrastructure. Together, benefits and obligations ensure both sides of the partnership are fulfilling their responsibilities to each other. Codifying SICI and implementing a strategy of operational collaboration to mitigate cyber risks to those entities is just one of my major legislative priorities this year, and I hope to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in advancing this effort. I also hope to work with the broader cyber policy and critical infrastructure communities, both on the efforts I've covered today and of those that we will undoubtedly need to address together in the future. As I mentioned, cyber risk management is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and we'll need to work together diligently and creatively as we increase security and build resilience across our critical infrastructure sectors. So legislative solutions to these challenges will not always be easy, and we need to ensure that we get them right. But if we work together in this effort, I like our chances for progress. So with that, let me say thank you very much for having me today. Thanks for your interest in the work you do in cyber, and thanks for the hard work that you're doing in defense of our nation. Thank you.